What if the person you loved, the family you trusted, and the life you built were all part of a lie so carefully hidden, you never saw it coming? Daniel thought he knew his world. A loyal fiancée, a supportive family, a future that felt certain. But sometimes, the truth doesn't just reveal itself, it explodes into your life, tearing everything apart. One discovery. One moment. And suddenly, Daniel's life unraveled before his eyes. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a descent into secrets long buried, and the painful rise to reclaim what was lost. How far would you go to uncover the truth when everything you believed in has crumbled? Welcome to Fractured Bonds, where every story reveals a deeper truth. Daniel had always thought his life was on track. At 27 years old, he was engaged to the love of his life, Lauren, a woman he had been with for nearly 6 years. His parents, Richard and Rebecca, were pillars of strength in his life, and together, their families had formed a close-knit bond. Daniel had always admired the strong relationship his parents shared, believing it was the blueprint for what he and Lauren would someday have. Little did he know, his world was about to be torn apart. Daniel and Lauren met during her freshman year of college. They were both staying in the same dorm building, and a casual meeting turned into a close friendship. They discovered early on that they lived just 2 towns apart, so whenever they returned home for breaks, Daniel offered Lauren a ride. It wasn't a big deal, an extra 20 minutes for him, but those rides became something special. Long conversations, shared laughter, and a growing connection sparked between them. After a few months, they started dating. It seemed like the natural progression. They were young, in love, and both came from families that valued closeness and tradition. Daniel met Lauren's parents during their many trips home, and before long, both families welcomed their relationship with open arms. It was as if everything was falling into place perfectly. Once Daniel graduated, he moved back home and secured a job in the city. Though Lauren had another year of school left, the distance didn't harm their relationship. They visited each other frequently, and by the time Lauren graduated, she moved in with Daniel. Together, they worked in the same city and built a life together. After 3 years of living together, Daniel proposed, and Lauren happily accepted. The wedding planning began, and everything seemed to be on track for the perfect future. Looking back, Daniel could now see the warning signs that were there all along, but at the time, he had no reason to suspect anything was amiss. His father, Richard, had always been a charming and outgoing man, someone who enjoyed making everyone feel welcome. So when he started calling Lauren more frequently, Daniel didn't think much of it. They would tell him they were talking about family events or planning birthday surprises for his mother, Rebecca. It all seemed perfectly innocent at the time. But there were moments that, in hindsight, should have raised red flags. Daniel remembered one specific occasion when Lauren was in the shower, and her phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw that it was his father calling. Without thinking, Daniel picked up the phone, only to hear Richard sound surprised, and somewhat upset, that it was him answering. Richard quickly explained that he was calling to discuss Rebecca's upcoming birthday and ended the call. At the time, Daniel brushed it off as nothing. Now, however, it felt like all the pieces were starting to fall into place, and Daniel couldn't believe how blind he had been. It was a Thursday, and like most Thursdays, Lauren had the day off. That morning, she made breakfast for the two of them before Daniel left for work. She kissed him goodbye and told him to have a great day. Daniel, running on autopilot, left for work without any inkling of what was about to happen. Around midday, Daniel realized he had forgotten an important set of documents at home that he needed for a meeting later that afternoon. He decided to swing by the house during his lunch break to pick them up. There was no need to text Lauren, he figured he would surprise her. When he pulled into the parking lot outside their apartment, he noticed a car that looked a lot like his father's parked nearby. He thought it was odd but assumed Richard had stopped by for a visit. After all, Richard and Lauren had become close over the years. Daniel didn't think anything of it. When he unlocked the door and walked inside, nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to find. The hallway was littered with clothes, both Richard's and Lauren's. A knot formed in Daniel's stomach as he followed the trail to the bedroom. With every step, his heart raced faster, and when he reached the bedroom door, he heard faint sounds coming from inside. He didn't want to believe what his mind was telling him, but deep down, he knew. Slowly, Daniel pushed the door open, and there they were, Richard and Lauren, in his bed. His fiancée and his father. Time seemed to stop as he stood there, frozen in place, unable to process what he was seeing. A tidal wave of emotions washed over him, anger, betrayal, disbelief. But his body refused to move. When he finally snapped out of his daze, Daniel's first instinct was to grab his phone. He needed to record this. Somehow, it made the reality of what was happening feel more bearable. He quietly picked up the scattered clothes from the floor and threw them into the hallway, his hands shaking with rage. Then, he stood at the bedroom door, filming the scene before him. Neither Richard nor Lauren noticed him at first, too wrapped up in their betrayal. But when Daniel flipped on the light, they both jumped in shock. Lauren gasped, and Richard scrambled to cover himself with a towel. Daniel's mind was a whirlwind, but he stayed silent, his phone still recording. Richard approached Daniel, pleading with him to stop recording. But Daniel wasn't going to stop. He warned his father to stay back, but Richard didn't listen. When Richard reached for the phone, Daniel's rage boiled over, and without thinking, he punched his father square in the jaw. Richard fell backward, hitting his head against the doorframe before crumpling to the floor, unconscious. Lauren screamed, but Daniel barely registered it. He turned the camera toward her and asked, "Worried about him, but you have nothing to say to me?" She didn't respond, she just sat there, frozen, her face pale. Richard eventually regained consciousness, groggy and disoriented. Daniel looked at both of them with disgust. "When I come back, I don't want to see either of you here," he said coldly. "If you stay, I'm sending this video to everyone we know." And with that, Daniel walked out the door, leaving them behind. Daniel sat in his car, numb. His phone buzzed with messages from work, reminding him about the meeting he had later that day, but all he could think about was what had just happened. After what felt like hours, he drove back to the office. When he arrived, his boss, Jane, immediately noticed something was wrong. She pulled him aside and asked if he was okay. Daniel didn't have the strength to tell her the whole story, so he simply said, "I've had a rough day." Jane didn't press further but gave him a concerned look. Daniel managed to get through the rest of the day, but his mind was far from the office. All he could think about was the betrayal he had just uncovered. The people he trusted most had shattered his life in a single moment. When he returned home that evening, the apartment was empty. Richard and Lauren were gone, just as he had told them to be. But the emptiness didn't bring Daniel any peace. The apartment that had once been filled with love and laughter now felt hollow, like the remains of a life that no longer existed. The next day, Daniel tried to reach out to his mother, Rebecca. She needed to know what had happened, but none of his calls were going through. After several attempts, Daniel decided to drive to his parents' house. His heart pounded the entire way there as he rehearsed what he would say. How could he possibly tell his mother that her husband had betrayed both of them in such a cruel way? When he arrived, Rebecca came storming out of the house, furious. She accused Daniel of attacking Richard for no reason, repeating the lie Richard had told her, that he had tried to break up a fight between Lauren and Daniel, and that Daniel had hit him. She berated Daniel, calling him all sorts of names, and even said that Lauren wasn't ready to forgive him yet. Daniel had heard enough. He interrupted his mother and told her the truth. Richard and Lauren had been having an affair. At first, Rebecca didn't believe him, but when he showed her the video, her face went pale. She stood in silence as she watched the evidence of her husband's betrayal unfold before her eyes. When the video ended, Rebecca looked up at Daniel, tears streaming down her face. But Daniel couldn't bring himself to comfort her. He was too hurt, too angry. Before he left, Daniel told his mother, "I need time to figure things out. Don't expect me to forgive either of you anytime soon." Daniel packed up all of Lauren's belongings and sent a message to her parents, letting them know that the engagement was off. He also gathered anything that reminded him of his father and his family and put it into storage. He couldn't stay in the apartment anymore, it was filled with too many painful memories. He needed a fresh start. Since discovering the betrayal, Daniel's life had become a constant emotional roller coaster. Waves of numbness hit him, often followed by sudden bursts of anger. The betrayal from Lauren and Richard continued to haunt him, and despite having a few friends in his life, the absence of family support felt overwhelming. In an attempt to regain control over his life, Daniel took a series of important steps. He decided to get tested for STDs, knowing he couldn't risk overlooking his health. He also sought out a therapist to help him process the events. His sessions were scheduled once a week, and though therapy was new to him, it became a much-needed outlet for his emotions. In the meantime, Daniel moved out of the apartment he had shared with Lauren. He found a small refurbished cabin on the outskirts of town, far enough away to gain some space. The move was difficult, but it gave him a sense of closure, especially after calling Lauren's parents to inform them that they needed to pick up her things. With the apartment now empty and no contact with his parents or Lauren, Daniel hoped this was the start of a new chapter. Despite his new location, Daniel still felt like a ghost. His phone was constantly lighting up with messages from Lauren, his parents, and even some friends, but he had no interest in responding to anyone. He buried himself in work, avoiding conversations with colleagues, even when his boss, Jane, tried to check in. Daniel didn't know if he would ever be okay, considering he had lost the three most important people in his life. Daniel's therapy sessions provided some solace. During their first meeting, his therapist spent time getting to know him, asking questions about his upbringing and how his family dynamic had changed. When Daniel spoke about his parents, he acknowledged that they had been great up until the betrayal. They had always communicated well, until now. The hardest part was discussing his mother, Rebecca. Her cruel words during their initial confrontation still cut deep, and Daniel felt that he couldn't easily forgive her. His therapist encouraged him to confront these feelings, and Daniel continued to open up about his struggles. By the second session, they delved deeper into the complicated relationship with his parents, uncovering emotions Daniel hadn't expected. Outside of therapy, Daniel found himself sinking back into isolation. He ignored invitations from friends and spent most evenings sitting on the porch of his cabin, staring out at the forest with a glass of whiskey. He still felt empty, and the idea of reconnecting with the world seemed exhausting. Daniel spent weeks in isolation before he finally reached out to his friends, as recommended by his therapist. He slowly began to reintegrate into his social circle, though it was difficult. At work, he became more open with Jane and a few co-workers, who had noticed his withdrawal. Meanwhile, Daniel focused on his new home. The cabin, though old and somewhat dated, became his sanctuary. He spent his free time refurbishing it, finding that the physical work helped him release stress. Though he still saw his therapist once a week, the home improvements gave him a sense of purpose. Despite these small steps forward, Daniel hadn't been able to fully confront his family. He hadn't spoken to his mother since the day he left her house, but he knew he couldn't avoid her forever. 1 month after the initial discovery, Daniel unblocked his mother's number and called her. She picked up almost immediately, her voice shaky. Daniel reassured her that he wanted to talk, and they agreed to meet at a diner near her house. When they met, Rebecca broke down in tears. She apologized profusely, explaining that she had only believed Richard and Lauren's version of events because she never imagined they would betray Daniel. She admitted that she had been blinded by her anger and that her words were inexcusable. Though Daniel appreciated the apology, he made it clear that Rebecca's harsh words had left a lasting wound. Rebecca revealed that she had separated from Richard the day after Daniel sent her the video of the affair. She had also kicked both Richard and Lauren out of the house and immediately sought legal advice. For Daniel, it wasn't just about the apology, it was about rebuilding trust. He told Rebecca that while he appreciated her efforts to make amends, he needed time to figure out whether he could have her in his life again. It would have to happen at his pace. As Daniel was preparing to leave the diner, Rebecca stopped him. She had something important to tell him. She explained that Lauren had visited her house recently, revealing that she was pregnant. Lauren didn't know if the child belonged to Daniel or Richard. Daniel was stunned. The revelation left him speechless, and he didn't know how to process it. He hadn't been in contact with Lauren since the day he left, and now this news added a new layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Rebecca assured Daniel that Lauren hadn't reached out to him, and she wasn't sure what would happen next. The revelation about Lauren's pregnancy weighed heavily on Daniel's mind. He had already been struggling with rebuilding his life after the betrayal, and now this news had thrown everything into uncertainty again. He didn't know what to feel, and as he left the diner, he felt lost all over again. Daniel continued his therapy, which became more essential than ever as he tried to cope with the whirlwind of emotions that followed. He was grateful for the support of his therapist, who helped him untangle the complicated mess that had become his life. Though he had begun the process of moving on, the road ahead was still long. Daniel realized that healing wasn't linear. There would be setbacks, just as there would be moments of growth. All he could do was take each day as it came, hoping that, in time, the pieces of his life would start to fall into place again. Thank you for exploring the stories that shape us. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more such content. See you again soon.